Hi, everyone. My name is Andrzej Schwartz. I'm a lecturer in the Infrastructure and Environment Division of the James Watt School of Engineering. And I'm also one of the developers of MoFEM, which is an open source parallel finite element library developed at our school, in particular in the Glasgow Computational Engineering Center. And today I would like to present you a few of selected applications of MoFEM to industrial and research problems. But before going to that, I would need to explain what is MoFEM. So it stands for the Mesh-Oriented Finite Element Method. And here you have a QR code that you can scan to access our website, which is also at the address mofem.eng.gla.ac.uk. And if you go there, this is how the landing page currently looks like. It shows lots of useful information about the code, but also it will highlight some of the applications. For example, here, fracture, problems of fracture. Here it's a metal forming with plasticity, or some simulations of cells using 3D images, various multi-phase problems, metamaterials and their indentation, even simulation of atmospheric currents, various flow problems described by Navier-Stokes equations. And here, finally, that's bone remodeling and also study of fracture in bones. The meshes for those bones were constructed using computed tomography. There are much more applications, and I'm going to talk about a few of them in a minute. But before that, I would like just to explain briefly what are the benefits of MoFEM compared to the existing industrial finite element codes, commercial, you would say, finite element codes. Why we are developing our own code? Well, for one, we are using advanced approximation approaches. I'm talking here about finite element approximation approaches. And this means that we can obtain solutions in a more effective way, cheaper, you could say. At the same time, we are using modern technologies for bookkeeping all information related to finite elements. In other words, we're using more efficient data structures. And at the same time, we are using high-performance computing tools embedded in the code, meaning that we can approach large-scale industrial applications. And like I said, the code is open source. It means that it's free and available to everyone in the world to benefit from, but also to contribute to. But at the same time, the core of MoFEM has been developed professionally, satisfying nuclear industry standards. And that's something I'm going to talk in a second. So here are the three applications that I chose to present to you today. The first one being about the prediction of crack growth in nuclear reactors. And of course, I wasn't working alone on this project, not at all. I was just one of the members of a large group. And to explain what's this project, I need to talk a bit about the problems of the advanced gas-cooled reactors. So about 20% of energy electric energy is being sourced from nuclear power in the UK. And here you can see a small map showing the locations of the currently working and also shut down nuclear power plants. I think all of them are operated by the company called EDF Energy, and almost all of them are advanced gas-cooled reactors. So this is a scheme of this reactor and a photo of a real working power plant. So the characteristic feature of those reactors are that there is no water in the reactor. It's being cooled by gas, CO2 in this case. And it brings certainly considerable benefits, but it also leads to some issues related to the graphite bricks in the core of the reactor. So those graphite bricks are standing in columns. Most of the volume of the reactor core is comprised of those bricks. They have cylindrical shape, and the control rods and fuel cells are being inserted inside of those bore holes inside of those bricks. So those graphite bricks, they act as neutron moderators. meaning that they are part of the nuclear reaction happening in the core, but they also provide mechanical stability for the whole structure and also thermal inertia during the operation. But the fact that those bricks are present in the reactor during years of work means that they have become irradiated, and that leads to cracking. So just to understand the impact of irradiation, you can see what's the shape of the brick. Of course, this one is out of the reactor. You can see the human hands for comparison. And there is lots of keyways on those bricks and lots of holes. And also what we're talking about, the irradiation is the dosage of neutrons, which accumulates over the years, and also the weight loss. And that combined with the fact that the temperatures inside of the core are very high, leads to complex stresses developing in those bricks, and the presence of those keyways and the contacts between the bricks. This all leads to cracking, and those cracks can be observed during inspections in the power plants. Here is a video of one of those inspections. You can see an axial crack that developed along one of the bricks, or in this case, even two of the bricks. So the presence of one or two of those cracks doesn't mean that the power plant has to be shut down. In fact, they were anticipated. The presence, the appearance of those cracks has been anticipated from the very beginning. However, there is only a limited number of cracks which can be sustained during a safe operation of a power plant. And therefore, the prediction of their growth and propagation is of paramount importance. And that's why for some years, there has been work doing around MoFEM about the creating a framework for predicting propagation of those cracks, for simulating that, and also trying to analyze when those cracks will propagate in the lifetime of the reactor. So here you can see a finite element mesh where the cracking is taking place, mesh of the brick, and you can see how the crack is propagating along the axial, along the axis of the brick. Here you can see it from different angles, and the propagation of this crack, which is in fact very similar to the one you saw in the video on the previous slide. The reason for this crack is this complex distribution of stresses that we discussed. And also, in addition to just visual understanding the path of the crack, we can look into the load factor. The value of the load which is needed for the crack to propagate for a given power plant and a given number of years of its operation. And based on that, the engineers can assess the safety of operation of power plants. Here is another case. This is a simulation of a lasso crack. This is the crack which starts somewhere in the middle of the brick. It propagates circumferentially. You can see it's kind of circles around the crack, around the brick. And at some point, it almost reaches the zone where it started, completing the loop. And if we compare the shape of this crack, we can see that it agrees very much with the photos from the inspection from one of such cracks observed in the power plant. So we can see that simulation is agreeing quite well with the real observations. The last study that I wanted to show to you here is a so-called secondary crack. It appears in a stack of bricks in the interfaces between those bricks when one of the brick has already cracked actually. So you can see here this long actual crack, which has been opened up. And due to this contact between the bricks, another crack appears and detachment of a segment can take place. And again, it can be compared with a photo of inspection inside of a real working reactor. And that's the shape agrees so well that we can trust prediction of the code in this particular case with a high degree of certainty. And that's why MoFEM has been used by EDF Energy and by engineering companies to predict crack propagation in nuclear power plants and to generate the conditions of a safety operation. Another example that I want to talk about today is for a completely different problem. It's called optimization of triboelectric nanogenerators. And again, I was working here and I'm continuing to work on this problem with a group of collaborators. So what are those triboelectric nanogenerators, or TANG for short? These are devices which can be used to convert mechanical energy into electrical energy. How this can happen? Well, this is happening by when we bring a couple of layers of specific materials into contact and then connect a circuit to those layers. And in some particular circumstances, we can see current happening in such circuit. What's the explanation for that? Well, that's combination of triboelectrification with electrostatic induction. And to briefly explain that, I just want to say that triboelectrification is nothing but static electricity. We all know that, how it happens. And imagine a couple of materials specifically chosen, which are neutral and they don't have any charge in the initial stage. Then we bring them into contact, and the charges start to generate in the interface. Basically, the reason for that is the electron transfer from one material to another. And once we take those layers out of contact, the charges will stay at their new home, at the new surface where they traveled. And that's why there would be a positive charge on one of the surface of the materials and negative charge on the other side. And therefore, when we take into account electrostatic induction, we notice that the potential difference will appear between those two layers. And when we have potential difference, means we have voltage. And if we connect those sides of those layers by a circuit, we will have current. So this is the principle, and you can see that based on this principle, based on this possibility to convert mechanical energy into electrical energy, we can say that those devices are energy harvesters, and they are getting lots of population because you can get clean electrical energy out of otherwise wasted mechanical energy. And you can think about various sources of mechanical energy for these applications, such as textiles. You can use the human motion of a human walking in particular clothes with devices embedded in the clothes and generating electricity. Or you can think about embedding those devices into the shoes, and then with every step we could generate electricity. But you can also think on a different scale, where you would put networks, arrays of those devices on the surface of ocean, and then the ocean waves would be the drivers, the sources of mechanical energy, generating electricity inside of those devices. So it's clear how to use those devices. The question is how to optimize their performance. And here you can see an experiment conducted by my colleagues in our School of Engineering. So they're looking into this test rig. And in the middle of this test rig, you can see those surfaces of this tank device marked with the number 1. And attached to this test rig is a load cell, so they can apply some load to bring those surfaces into contact, measure the voltage or measure the current between those layers, separate them, measure again, and so on and so forth. So with a load cell, they can increase and decrease the mechanical load applied. And what they noticed is that both voltage and the current depend on the load applied. It increases. The more load you apply, the more voltage you get. And the reason for that is, of course, the roughness of the surfaces of those tribolayers. Yeah, you can even see with the naked eye some 3D printed roughness on top on the surface of one of those layers. And my colleagues, experimental members of experimental group, asked me if I can simulate this process and try to understand and explain and maybe use the knowledge about the dependence of output of the performance of the devices, of voltage and current, on the roughness of the surfaces of those layers and the applied load. So how would I approach this kind of simulation? I would consider a model of this device, and I would ask my colleagues to do surface roughness measurements for one of the layers. Here you can see the map of the surface height in millimeters. for a given coordinates of X and Y on one of these layers. So I would take this kind of measurement and project it on top of a 3D finite element mesh. You can see it over here. And then when I construct a finite element model like this, I would bring it into contact with another side being on top. And here how the results of simulation look like. So first, let's look into this surface height profile. So the height is shown here with the color. And you can notice that the red zones over here correspond to the mountains of the surface, you could say that. And then the blue zones corresponds to the valleys of the surface. And then when we analyze the results of the simulation, we can look into the contact area. So here with the black color, we are showing the contact area where the contact is taking place, and with the gray area is where the contact is not taking place. So you can see how from the very beginning, the contact is occurring only on the tops of the mountains of the surface. We call them asperities. So this is where the contact is starting. You can see almost the same shape as these red zones over here. And only by applying more load, we can bring into contact the valleys. And that's actually very important for this problem that we are looking at, is that since the contact is the source for appearing of the charges appear only in the zones of the real contact. And therefore, the more load we apply, the more contact area is growing, and the more charges will appear. And therefore, the more performance output will be of the device. And if we plot the evolution of the contact area with respect to the applied load, we can see that the results of simulation agree reasonably well with the experiment and show the monotonic increase of the contact area with applied load, almost linear in the beginning, and then there is some kind of saturation later on. There is some discrepancy between the two models, between the simulation and experiment, but of course there's further room for improvement, and this is ongoing work, like I said in the very beginning. And the last application of MoFEM that I wanted to show to you today is again from a completely different domain. It's about the optical imaging through biological tissues. And again, I'm working with a group here of my colleagues, collaborators in the university. And the main idea behind this kind of application is this optical imaging. So optical imaging is a method of seeing through opaque media, such as biological tissue or fog, using visible or near infrared light, like a laser, for example. And well, you could see it yourself if you try to shine a light from your phone through your hand in a dark room, you might see something like this, blood vessels. And well, the advantages of using this method of optical imaging using lasers through say human organs, human bodies, is the fact that, like, first of all, it's a different kind of radiation. Light is non-ionizing, so it's safer than X-ray and easier to use than MRI. But also is that the propagation of light, diffusion of light through biological tissue is particularly sensitive to the levels of oxygen. It means that it can look for neural activity. And therefore, there are lots of prototypes being developed, like this helmet over here, which is has arrays of lasers and detectors trying to capture what's happening in a human's head. And there are also developments like this one over here, with also arrays of sources and detectors of light. However, the current limitations of the prototypes is that they can look only through a few centimeters of a tissue. Basically, they're looking on one side of the head all the time. They can see what's happening only on the surface. It would be much more interesting to be able to see through the head. However, that's quite difficult, and therefore my colleagues are doing experimental work in this direction. So they have this experimental setup over here with a couple of slabs made from a material which resembles properties of biological tissue. They shine a laser on one side, and they look into a camera on the other side. And there is a hidden object somewhere inside of this, in between of those slabs. It could be just a letter of X. And they're looking for quite a significant thickness of those slabs, and the material are such that you cannot see any light at all, no matter how powerful the laser is on the other side. But they use special cameras which are capturing single photons. And basically what they count is the number of photons reaching this camera for a given time. This is called time of flight histogram, meaning that time that the photons take to fly from one side of the slab to another. And having this data, they can try to reconstruct the images, the hidden images, using various methods. Some of those methods are not working too well. Other methods, like this machine learning model, are somewhat better. But the problem is that there's you cannot do too many experiments with the different shapes of this hidden object. So that's why my colleagues were asking me if we can do virtual experiments, simulations of the propagation of light through human tissue or biological tissue or any opaque media. And it turned out that we can. Here we can see results of simulation of how the light is propagating through something resembling this experimental slabs. You can see how it's being absorbed in this case by the hidden object, and how this hidden object affects the propagation of the light pulse, and how this light pulse is reaching the other side. And if we have a camera on the other side, we could be actually doing virtual experiments. So here you can see how the images on this other side of the slab look like for the simulation. Here you have different handwritten letters. You can see a triangular mesh on them. So this is how you can be sure that we're using finite elements over here. And you can see that with the increasing thickness of the slab, actually the image becomes more and more blurred. But if we try to plot this time of flight histograms, similar ones to the ones used in the experiment, we can see that the MoFEM simulations are very close to experimental data. They're fitting it very well, both in case without the hidden object and with this hidden object. So it means that, again, the simulation predicts reality very reasonably. So it can be used for more complex cases. And here you can see a simulation of light propagating through a head. And there is an object over here. You can see how the propagation of this laser pulse through the head is affected by the presence of this object. So this object is not a hidden object. It's a zone of different absorption. You can think about this as possibly a stroke somewhere in the head. And you can see how those outputting histograms of counting of number of photons reaching the other side, how it's being shifted due to the presence of this absorption zone, meaning that this particular approach to imaging using light, laser light, could be used for possibly finding the presence of such zone like a stroke in a head. Basically, it's all I wanted to present to you today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your interest. And the last thing I want to mention is that I'm always looking for motivated students to do master projects and PhD projects. So if any of you are interested in this kind of problems that I was showing to you today, please feel free to contact me via email or in person class if you want. Thank you again. See you.